Hey, remote pilots, Jason Schabbert here, M0A.com, remotepilot101.com, and this new year has brought a lot of changes to the small unmanned aircraft space. And if I can be honest with you, this is the third, maybe the fourth time I've shot this video. Every time I shoot this video, the FAA changes its dates on all its new rules. What are these new rules I'm talking about? Well, they include having remote ID, which is a sort of our digital license plate on our drones, as well as removing the need for waivers for certain operations, such as operations at night, flight over people, moving vehicles, also how we as remote pilots renew our certificates. Now, these new rules are being phased in over time. And if you've been following the space, that time has been changed. We started with March 1st, then we moved to March 16th, then for some it's April 7th, then for some other rules it's the end of April. So I am just gonna say this, spring. Can I get away with that? Spring of 2021 is when these rules will take effect. And you know we are going to continue at M0A.com, Remote Pilot 101. We're going to continue to just update you on our social media channels as these rules change, because they just every week I feel like I'm reshooting this 20-minute long video. Now we're just going to say spring, and I will update you on our Facebook feeds, little YouTube videos here and there. Mostly check our Facebook feeds out as well. You can always reach out to our amazing support team as well. So just so you're aware of that. Anyways, let's dive into a little bit more about the rules, starting with the new recurrent test. So now for our recurrent tests, we no longer need to go to a PSI testing center to actually go and receive our recurrent, as it's called. The FAA is going to deliver this all online through a course. Now, it's going to include new topics too, like night operations as well. However, this is not, as of this recording and this release, in place just yet. And let me tell you, they've changed the date 3 times already. So you need to consult the latest FAA register, reach out to myself or our team to figure out those dates. They are in April. Right now, we're releasing this in March. Those dates are out to April. If you need a recurrent test this month, you're still going to your same PSI testing center like you always did and taking the recurrent test. With them moving these dates, I would even argue if you're in April, you might still want to be thinking, I probably should go take the actual PSI test just to be safe. So I just want to avoid any confusion about that until they release this, and I will let you know on our Facebook page and through YouTube as soon as they do release this. I just want to keep you up to date on it. But this online recurrent training includes in the test. Now you're getting questions about things like night operations, specifically how to avoid collisions, what's the required lighting, and then even some stuff they're taking from the manned aviation realms. You've heard me say it a million times, as a remote pilot, you're just a heartbeat away from becoming a manned pilot. So if you ever consider it, you know we have the whole suite of products for that as well. But you'll dive into things that we teach in manned aviation, like the night physiology for pilots, which are things like my depth perception, and difficulty perceiving reference points, night illusions, visual illusions that we can experience as remote pilots at night. Now, this is important. The new recurrent training, it's satisfying the recurrent training requirements for remote pilots. This is it's not anything to do with the initial. The initial test hasn't changed. Initial remote pilot applicants who do not also hold a Part 61 certificate, and at least a private pilot certificate or higher, that's what I mean when I say that here, and you have to possess a flight review as well. Unless that's you still need to pass an initial drone certification exam. That's what I've been doing since 2016 here at remotepilot101.com. Now bring everything under the name M0A.com, which is our manned aviation company as well, just to bring you so much value. The rule that's going to allow drone flight over people, hear this, without a waiver, goes into effect, and the rule allows flight over people provided the drone weighs less than 55 pounds. Now, for this, the FAA has created 4 different categories of drones based on the weight of these drones, and these categories really dictate these over people operations, is what we'll actually call them. Let's take a look at each and every one of these categories here. And I'm a visual learner. I had our amazing team here at M0A make up some great graphics for you. Category 1, These are small unmanned aircraft that must weigh less than 0.55. That's like the weight of like 2 sticks of butter. It's not a whole lot to it. It includes everything on board or otherwise attached. Category 1 aircraft cannot have exposed rotating parts that would lacerate human skin. When I picture this, I think of ducted engines, is what I think of when they mention something like that. Although they don't implicitly use the phrase ducted engines, that's where I go. Let me know in the comments if I'm off base or if you think of something else in addition to that as well. Category 2 are small unmanned aircraft must not cause injury to a human being that is the equivalent to or greater than, you ready for this? The severity of injury caused by the transfer of 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy upon impact from a rigid object that does not contain any exposed rotating parts that could lacerate human skin upon the impact of a human being. The aircraft does not contain any safety defects. That's a lot to read, and you're probably saying, what on earth are they talking? What does 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy feel like, right? Well, we'll get to that here in a second. Category 2 requires FAA accepted means of compliance, by the way, as well, and FAA accepted declaration of compliance. Now, for perspective, by the way, that 11 foot-pounds of energy, remember when you're in middle school and you played dodgeball? Maybe some of you are 40 or 50 are still playing dodgeball. It's like getting hit by a dodgeball, essentially. Just to give you some perspective. And I'm not talking dodgeball, the movie, where you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. This is totally different. I'm getting on a tangent now. Category 3, small unmanned aircraft must not cause injury to a human being that is the equivalent to or greater than the severity of injury caused by the transfer of 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy upon impact from the rigid object, and continues just like the previous category did, all the way down to doesn't contain any safety defects. Category 3 requires that same means of compliance, that declaration of compliance as well. Now moving into Category 4. Category 4, small unmanned aircraft must have an airworthiness certificate now, issued under Part 21 of FAA regulations. Category 4 aircraft must be operated in accordance with the operating limitations specified in the approved flight manual or otherwise specified by the administrator. You can guess who the administrator actually is. That's the Federal Aviation Administration. Now, the operating limitations of the Category 4 aircraft must not prohibit operations over human beings. They must not contradict each other. They must be interwoven together. Now, in addition to this, Category 4 aircraft must have maintenance, preventative maintenance, alterations, inspections performed in accordance with specific requirements. Then they say this in the final rule. We don't even have our final ruling just yet. It's a proposal. It's kind of like a memorandum of understanding that we're rolling out with here. And let me put this all in perspective for you. If anything is struck by a Category 2, 3, or 4 unmanned aircraft, there will be damage, and it will probably hurt. So please err on the side of caution and be careful when operating over people. And again, we'll be keeping you up to date as these final rulings work to come out. But there's more to this and more to this video. The rules for flight operations over moving vehicles have also been updated. And this has actually come in very handy when certain retail operators will be using unmanned area vehicles for deliveries and UAVs for over street flights or flight over streets. So operations for over moving vehicles, the UAV must be the same categories, 1, 2, or 3 we just learned. The UAV must be eligible to operate over people, what we just spoke about, and may not maintain sustained flight over moving vehicles. The flight must be transit operations only. You all know my very good friend, Ken Herron. I'm blessed to call him a friend and be his co-host oftentimes for Thursday Night Live. Ken loves to call this the Amazon rule. That's what he loves to call it. I mean, Amazon's not the only one doing package delivery. It's really the package delivery rule. So that previous note of it's not sustained flight over moving vehicles. I can't just hover over your car. This is in transit going somewhere. I'm flying over vehicles. So for these unmanned operations under Category 1, 2, 3, the small unmanned aircraft throughout the operation must remain within or over a closed or restricted access site, and all human beings located inside a moving vehicle within the closed and restricted access site must be on notice that the small unmanned aerial vehicle may fly over them or must not maintain sustained flight over those moving vehicles. We're talking ground vehicles here, cars, trucks. That's what I'm actually talking about with this. Now, of course, there's that pesky Category 4. Category 4 operations, the small unmanned aircraft must have, like we spoke about, an airworthiness certificate. This is issued once again under Part 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations and be operated in accordance with the operating limitations specified in the flight manual or otherwise specified by the administrator. Additionally, the operating limitations of the unmanned aircraft must not prohibit operations over human beings located inside moving vehicles. Now, the reason these rule changes have come to be is that drones are becoming more commonplace. They're being used by various state and federal agencies for surveillance, research, and now we're learning for commerce as well. The sky is getting crowded, which is why the FAA now has created Remote ID. Now, the Remote ID is the ability of a drone in flight to broadcast its identification and location information during flight. I know so many of you think this is like Big Brother watching you stuff. I promise you it's not Big Brother watching you. Remote ID is the ability of a SUAS in flight to provide identification, location information that can be received by other parties. The true idea behind Remote ID is that it'll be able to help law enforcement, the FAA, and other federal agencies to find the control station of a particular drone when the unit appears to be flying in an unsafe manner. It'll help identify an SUAS if one is flying in an area that is off limits. You saw this so much, like when COVID started. Remember, I want to say within like 1 week of each other, there was the Mavic, and I think both were Mavics that landed in the middle of the baseball diamond at 2 professional baseball games. It was just the players and the coaches there. There was no crowd. And there was one recently with the Super Bowl. I mean, there's just so many things. We wouldn't need Remote ID if everybody just played by the rules. But because people don't always play by the rules, well, us rule followers, well, we'll continue to follow the rules and follow this one too. Remote ID is going to give authorities just the ability to contact the drone owner and provide education, as they call it, to correct unsafe and illegal operations. Now, the Remote ID rule is laying the foundation of safety for the security groundwork needed for far more complex SUAS operation, like our deliveries by air. The standard Remote ID message will show the serial number and location of the SUAS, including the latitude and longitude along with the altitude and speed. The emergency status of the SUAS will be shown and it will actually be time-stamped as well. So persons who have a personal wireless device and who are within range of the broadcast will be able to see where the SUAS is. However, and this is an important however, there's an important distinction, so please pay attention. The actual SUAS ID, that's your registration database, will be limited to just the FAA, but it can be made available to local law enforcement upon request. Now, so I want to be very, very clear on this. Remote ID allows the FAA to look at the registration of a drone and law enforcement to do the same. This is how I like to think, law enforcement can run a license plate on a car and find the registered owner, but you and I can't just go Google someone's license plate and figure out who they are and where they live. It's the exact same thing. That's why the analogy of Remote ID being a license plate for your drone is pretty accurate. Now, the range of the broadcast for Remote ID will have each in the SUAS a broadcast at maximum range. So modern SUAS units will have Remote ID broadcast ability built into them. Older drones, well, they're going to have to be retrofitted to comply with this rule. Now, take note of the language from the FAA on the broadcast rule. The broadcast module, this is the module that's broadcasting the Remote ID signal, may be a separate device that is attached to the SUAS, or it can be feature built into the device. If the broadcast module is retrofitted, the module serial number must be entered into the registration record for the unmanned aircraft. We do the same thing in manned aviation, by the way, with this. Remote ID, the Remote ID message is going to include the serial number of the SUAS, its location using longitude and latitude, and its altitude. Also its velocity and location where it launched from, and of course a time stamp of all of this. The SUAS remotely identifying with a broadcast module must be operated within visual line of sight at all times, the rule reads. Now, the broadcast module, this will broadcast via a radio frequency. And they even go as far in this memorandum, we'll call it, to say it will likely be Wi-Fi or Bluetooth technology. They don't even totally know. Again, this isn't final ruling yet, and it's almost like they're putting it back on the manufacturers like, hey, what do you want to make? That's what it sounds like to me. But anyways, it will be compatible with your personal wireless devices and the range of remote ID broadcast module messaging similar to standard remote ID. Now, manufacturers have several months to actually comply with this, and as they build unmanned aircraft now with remote ID actually built in. But the clock started with the rule being published in 2020, so compliance by fall of 2022 is what they're actually targeting. Unmanned aircraft operators who have units that do not have remote ID installed have 30 months to comply after the rule's effective date. So that actually will put us into 2023. Now, under this final rule, recreational drone pilots may continue to register once and apply that unique registration number to multiple aircraft. So that's kind of cool. During registration, they'll have to list the serial number of any standard remote ID unmanned aircraft. If a remote ID broadcast module is used, the module's serial number must be listed on the registration. This is going to allow the pilot, the operator, to move the module from unmanned aircraft to unmanned aircraft so long as the unmanned aircraft are on the same registration number. So we know and have all of that. Now, the requirement for remote ID was required as a stipulation for the FAA to remove the requirement for a waiver for SUAS operations at night and for flights over people. Remote ID for unmanned aircraft is very similar to the way manned aircraft are required to have transponders in certain airspace. Basically, we're talking about congested airspace. And again, for those of you thinking, this is Big Brother stuff, Jason, it's not. You go type in one of my airplanes right now online. Go to a website like flightaware.com and type in 23 Mike Zulu. You can see where I fly to, how straight I flew, what altitude I flew at, where I'm going to be going, where I'm scheduled. It's all there. It's all public data. And that's public data. This won't even be public. This will just be FAA and local law enforcement. So manned aviation is even more Big Brother, if you want to actually call it that. But it's all about protecting our airspace because there's a lot of traffic there, and the FAA would like to be able to, well, keep people from colliding with one another. And the pilots may not see each other. They're in contact with air traffic control. We can warn them of proximity. In manned aviation, drones, the same thing is possibly coming. But just as there's some airspace without transponders in manned aviation, or they're not required because it's low to the ground or it's uncluttered, the FAA has set aside a certain airspace where unmanned aircraft are not required to have remote ID. The FAA has created, you ready for this new acronym? As if we didn't have enough acronyms in aviation already. FAA Recognized Identification Areas, or FRIAs. That's how the acronym is pronounced. FRIAs are geographic areas recognized by the FAA where unmanned aircraft not equipped with remote ID are allowed to fly. These FRIAs are usually located near schools and are used for training facilities. Think of them like that, church or school parking lot where you learn to drive, right? On a Saturday when you're 15 and no one was there because you needed a place to practice. That's the purpose of a FRIA, really. However, there's only certain organizations that are able to apply establishment of this FRIA, and they are community-based organizations recognized by the administrator, the FAA. Mostly primary and secondary education institutions, trade schools fall into that as well, colleges, universities, most certainly. Unmanned aircraft operating within the FRIAs must operate within visual line of sight and stay within the boundaries of the FRIA. The FAA will begin accepting application for FRIAs 18 months after the effective date of the rule. And we'll have more on that in a moment here. The FRIA authorizations will be valid for 48 months, and they can be renewed. And the FAA has the authority to terminate them for safety or security reasons if they believe so. Now, again, there is so much happening in this space, and it is always changing. And I want you to know this and rest assured that here at Remote Pilot 101, M0A.com, you're a part of the M0A Nation. And we have an amazing team of certificated flight instructors from the FAA. They're just here to help you every step of the way, whether it's that complex airspace question, whether it's you're nervous about your Part 107 test, whatever it may be, myself and this amazing M0A.com team, well, we are here to serve you. So have a blessed, amazing, outstanding day. Can't wait to read your comments below this video on YouTube, on Facebook, and most importantly, remember that a good pilot is always learning. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you.